great week. It's one of those weeks in which about 85 things which had been juggling like this and threatening to come down on my head suddenly came down in the right order. Isn't that a nice feeling? A sense of closure, they call it. You're juggling things for week after week after week, and very often even when they don't depend on your own inadequacies, but upon a whole host of things over which you have no control. It's frustrating to be like this all the time. And on Thursday, and what turned out to be close to a 20-hour day, the whole thing fell into place. I went to sleep that night with my fingers fat and tired. I typed and typed and typed and typed and typed. But when I went to sleep, I said, it's been a good day. The directory got out, and a number of items got finished, and the newsletter, which didn't appear like it was going to fall together, about midnight started coming together, and I began retyping things, and we got the newsletter out on time. A whole host of things just came together. And as I was thinking about that, it seemed to me that we've been talking about the tension between reaching out with goals and at the same time living life to its fullest. Before each sermon, in my own mind, I rethink where we've been for the past couple of weeks, and so for some of you, I'd like to remind you of some of the things we've been talking about. We've been saying, based upon our biblical understanding of the thought patterns that came from the Hebrews all the way up through Jesus, we've been saying that the impact of the biblical understanding of life is that the future is now. That's true of all people who ultimately do not con themselves into avoiding the now by looking either at the past or into some far-off event. The American Indian said every journey begins with one step, and that one step, of course, is the now. We can avoid a tremendous amount of upheaval in our lives if we would only get rid of that if only. If only this would happen, I would do this. If only that would happen, I would do this. If only I had this, I would do this. And let a whole life trickle away waiting for the if only event, only to find far too often when the if only event comes, it doesn't change anything. You understand it in your own lives, and you can look around and you can see it in the lives of others, including yours truly. How many times in my life have I said, if only I had a little more adequate study, I would write this. It hasn't got anything to do with an adequate study. One can write anywhere, one can think anywhere, one can dream anywhere, but it's a nice way to avoid having to actually accomplish things. Your kids do it all the time, and you did too. Somehow or another, when it came time to do homework, you spent about 2.5 hours organizing. Sharpening pencils, getting out paper, setting it all out, getting the books in order, getting this all together, getting a drink of water, going to the lady or men's room, and by the time you got through with all of this, it was almost too late to do the homework. But who could fault you for preparing adequately for the job? And you avoided it. We had in our household what was called dishwater diarrhea. Every time the dishes had to be done, everybody hit for the job. It was their way of avoiding the whole upkeep. And the tragedy of life is when you came out, the dishes were still there, a little dirtier. And life's like that too often. So we've been talking about this. The future is now. Begin now. And I had a chance to talk with Terry Johnson on Friday. He's the one that we had lunch with, and I had talked with him about this whole concept and the biblical view, and he's been working on it and helping me to grow with it and doing some planning and some feeding, and said it's got to go back over his mind. He thinks he knows where it is, but he'd like to do some more talking about it. I think it's exciting. What you do today does make a difference. What you do today will influence your own life, and what you do today is the only thing you've got control over. So live it now. Do it now. Enjoy it now. Second thing we've been saying all the way along is that goals are a means of postponement. That's a strange reversal. Usually goals are looked upon as a means of direction. And that's a tension I want to talk about in just a moment. But goals are oftentimes a mean of postponement. When we retire, we're going to get this little cottage up by a lake, and I'm not going to do anything but fish and walk around in the woods and build nice roaring fires and enjoy it. you'll say to people, well, why don't you do it now? Oh, no, we can't do it now. And then the tragedy, even when they do it, at a later age in life, when they have reached that point of retirement and nothing has suddenly stepped in to cut it short, to have them do it and then say, why, 35 years ago, didn't we? It's a matter of establishing priorities, as you well know. And sometimes the priorities of life are those we complain most about, but we have the control over them. You get caught up with a job and go more and more and longer and work harder and harder for the job, and you say, I can't get away from it. And it's difficult to say to a boss who can't stand being anywhere else except to work because that's his only goal, his only sense of accomplishment. There are more important things in my life than spending all day, all night, every night just tearing up on the basis of a work ethic. But somebody's got to do it, and it's got to be Christians who have a certain strength and understanding in their lives, who can understand that there is a perspective, that hard work is valuable, but it needs to be limited, because hard work becomes destructive when it destroys the very existence of an individual. And it's difficult to speak to corporation individuals who want to hold out the rhetoric that what they do is for the value of their employees, and at the same time try to understand what happens when it comes time to trim the fat. You all know what that means. To get rid of some of the overhead. And the extremely difficult job that some of you face of having to fire somebody. Well, we have an interesting scripture today. That's all just sort of background to kind of give you all something to talk about and think about and mull over. The interesting thing is that what we're talking is not new, it's ancient. The kinds of things that we're mentioning at this point are positively part of the world history of wisdom literature. For everything there is a season and a time, for every matter under heaven, a time to be born. We were laughing last night. Kids, David is now 7. He's not. He won't be for 2 months. But he's tired of being 6. He's almost 7. Your kids go through that. I'm 6 and a half. As soon as 6th birthday, I'm 6 and a half. And as soon as they're 6 and a half, I'm almost 7. And they laugh. Ha-ha, I'm almost 7 and you're just 6 and a half. You know, it's like 3 days difference between them or something like that. As though you have control over it. Now, what's wrong with being what your age says? I had no control over it when I was born. I am what I am. Okay, I can't make myself younger. I can't change that chronological age. How frustrating to try to. How frustrating to be caught up without being able to say, hey, that's something that God assigned to me in my own way. I have no control over it. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. That's something we often don't understand. Part of the rhetoric of the age is that you speak only in the extremes. You never deal with the mass majority in the middle. Look at any of the political movements. Look at women's lib, the black movement, a whole host of other things, communism, socialism to an extent. And what they're doing is talking about the extremes out here where very few people actually function and leave the vast majority of people in the middle alone. This is true of psychology. There is no such thing as normal psychology. There's only abnormal psychology. Am I right? Every course you've ever taken is abnormal psychology. Sociology is abnormal sociology. Ask somebody for a norm of what's normal, and they say, oh, we don't know. We only know what's not normal. And so the rhetoric is out here. You got to plant and give peace, and you don't dare tear anything up. We see it in the real struggle going up in north, where the principle of a fire, letting it burn, is basically good. It's exactly the way nature re-fertilizes and reworks a forest. You will kill a forest off by not having a fire in it. But when it runs contrary to the human needs and wants, you run into a whole host of conflicting opinions and ideas. Some people want only to plant and not do any plucking, and some want to do the plucking and never plant, but the fact of the matter is both of them go together. And in almost every one of the opposites that this particular portion of Scripture gives, there are opposites that are at healthy tension one with the other. And the real difficulty is not when you get down and meditate upon it and think upon it, knowing whether you should plant or pluck, but knowing when you should plant and when you should pluck. It's the most crucial thing. It's the first point of the sermon, believe it or not. Geez, you've only got about 5 minutes to get all the points in. A time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh. If you never cried, you wouldn't know what happiness was. I talked in a prayer today about the lovely sunshine. The only reason I appreciate the sunshine is we've had some pretty bad days. With some rain and cloudiness and dampness, and my bones ached. Then you get a day like this, it's the contrast. And so, as Khalil Gibran says, your soul contains only the joy which sorrow has carved into. You can't avoid these things. You live with them. Happiness and the joy of crying and laughing, a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, a time to lose, a time to keep, a time to cast away, a time to rend, tear, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence. I think Brother Carter better meditate upon this particular verse. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak. A time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, a time for peace. For everything, there is a season. It's one of the basic rules of education, that you can learn things only as they come along, and that there is a right time and a right place and a right basic setting for something to be learned. You know that to be true. That is, that in order to learn to walk, you must learn to crawl first. And if you avoid learning to crawl, you do serious brain damage. Something we never knew before. And now you have teams of people helping kids who are walking to go back through the process and learning to crawl, to develop the motor nerves in their brain so that they'll have the ability to function even better. One of the tragedies of American life, I think, is a failure to recognize that. We are trying to move our kids through a whole series of life experiences at a rapid rate, giving them no time whatsoever to adjust and to grow. In the Free Press of this week, there was a lovely little article about a 7-year-old girl who for 2 years, has been secretly a closet beauty parlor habitee. And she's come out into the open. Her hair is bleached and her hair is touched up each week at the beauty parlor. And her mother goes, and while this daughter, 7 years of age, drinks coffee and has her hair done, the mother waits for her. And she's proud of the fact that her daughter wants to look her best. Strange, isn't it? A 7-year-old with the natural beauty that kids have can't be accepted as a 7-year-old with natural beauty. We have to somehow or another make her a little adult. Another year we'll put on a training bra. Of all things, what is a training bra? Of all things where there is form over function, that's got to be it. I mean, it's crazy. I understand the psychological impact that the girls at a certain age have to have something showing along the back strip, but isn't that a strange thing? We force them, we grow, and then we wonder why we have problems. We've got kids who are burnt out by the time they're 11 and 12 because we as adults have insisted that they live not as children, but like we do. We have not given them the opportunity to grow as naturally they should, but have forced learning experiences upon them that they're not only not ready for, but can't comprehend. What we need to understand is that there is a pace, an understanding of life, and that to learn something too soon or to learn it too late can be damaging, but the best thing is to let it flow and to hold it out and to let children begin to develop their pace. For the other side of the tragedy is that we once understand that, we say now, oh, You're 4 years old. This is what you're supposed to be doing. We have a near friend who was married to a good friend. That's why she's a near friend, who was sort of a kook child psychologist. By that I mean she smiled her way through all of the classes and really learned very little. She got very angry at me one day because we had a big battle and I took the entire field of child psychology apart in about 30 seconds, and she was extremely upset because her whole life had been devoted to something that I had destroyed. And I said, if what you say is true, why don't you rebuttal? You at least ought to have sense enough to do that. Oh, she stormed out and she wouldn't talk to me. I was being a little mean. I didn't believe everything I was saying, but I wanted to put her on a little bit because I was irked at her. And one of the reasons I was irked at her is David and Chris had an opportunity of staying with her, and she would spank David for doing something that was not the time for him to do it according to the books. She had a list. Children will do these things, ... Now, you all know the pressures you get. It's called potty training. One of the great myths is that my kid was potty trained at 6 hours. Right? Gotta brag. Somehow or another, my child's bright because he got potty trained before your child. And it's like recovery from operations. We all lie about it. I was up and around in 2 days. How come it's taking you 6 weeks? You're up and around and back down again. You know, you made it to the wall and back. That's nonsense. It takes time. You have to recuperate. It takes time for a child to learn these bodily functions and to handle them right. And there's no such thing as early potty training. It's just early parent training. Get the kid out of bed and sit him on a coffee can and hold him there long enough, you potty trained him. It's nonsense. But what we need to really move with is the idea that there is a time and a season for all of our experiences. And that's adults as well. And we have to hold that in balance and constantly be in tune with ourselves. And the tragedies of life come when that sequence is broken for reasons we have no control over. There's a time. There's a season under heaven for everything. Part of our understanding of God and life is to put it into a proper sequence. And secondly, very quickly, are goals really bad? No. We've been talking about sort of an anti-goal direction in life, and we have to recognize that one has to set goals. The tragedy with goals is that they become over-consuming. Everything in our life seems to be moving and consumed by that goal. All of us need to know something about directions. One of the tragedies of modern life in the modern city in Detroit with the gangs and all is that these kids don't know where they're going. And when you don't know where you're going, you whip out in every direction, right? Place anybody. It's easiest to see it in your children because they're the ones most often placed in stressful situations. In a situation where there is absolute stress upon them, and what do? They go to pieces, lay down on the floor, scream and kick, and beat their head and ran like this because they don't know what direction to go. Am I right? And you place yourself in the same kind of a stressful situation, and with enough pressure, you break the same way. It's oftentimes called acts of war or aggression. And we try to justify it, and we try to reach out, but most of us at the same time, when we don't know where we're going, are so lost and caught up and feeling such a frustration that we could just beat our hands down against the table and cry. What am I going to do? Where am I going? Who cares are the three existential questions of life. And it's only when you can put them in with the idea of my own value and my own direction and my own caring and the caring of those around me that you avoid, ultimately, the breakdown caused by those questions. I think Mr. Dewey, the psychologist, the philosopher, was right at this point. We ought to set a series of mini goals, not the far, far range ones, and be flexible. For there's a very real sense that each step of the way is the reaching of a new goal. And each goal offers an opportunity for a change of direction and valuation. So that while we are looking perhaps down the road there in this church, to pick an example, and would like to see in a few years the kind of strength we have now expanded, the kind of care we have now expanded, the kind of warmth we have now expanded, and recognize those are the goals, we could spend all of our time and all of our efforts talking about how wonderful those things would be if we would accomplish them and never reach out loving anybody. And if I say to you that every one of us have been in churches at one time or another that used the rhetoric and didn't show it, you'll nod amen. Because the rhetoric for so many people, the speaking is enough, but they don't see any obligation whatsoever to reach out and do it. Just say it. Just say it. Keep repeating it. And by repeating it, you will con yourself into believing that it's actually happening. Except when you quit saying it, the hatred and the bitterness and the fears and all the things that go to it are there. Now, we're not a perfect church. Nobody would say that we are. Your minister makes as many goofs as any minister and probably more than most. But we're a growing church because we can say that, and we can open up, and we can be, and we can share, and we can practice what we're preaching all the way through. And when we fail, somebody can say, hey, you goofed, and I'll say, yeah, and we'll go from there. Now that's exciting. On the way home from a wedding reception last night, Carol Mann, some of you may have known the Mann family from the First Congregational Church in Royal Oak, and her young groom, now husband, Jeff Seymour. They've been here several times and will be back. We're married here last night. It was kind of nice. Just a quick aside. This cross up here, we've been talking for months about how that cross got here. Do you remember that? I finally discovered the secret of it, okay? The main cross that you see there was given by the youth fellowship of this church when this church was built. But if you'll look carefully, there are 4 pieces of wood on the inside of that cross. Those 4 pieces of wood come from buildings of churches that helped establish this church and supported it in its early years. There's a piece of oak hewn in 1837, part of the original church of First Congregational Church of Royal Oak. Then there's a piece of oak and another piece of pine and a piece of gumwood coming from Lathrop Village Congregational Church, Pontiac Congregational Church, and North Congregational Church. So those 4 churches helped us to get established, and those 4 pieces of wood are to be in there. And the Mann family that I knew years ago over at First Congregational Church, their daughter, who was only 4 or 5 at that time, but somehow now remembered me and said when the time came she wanted me to be there and participate in the wedding, stood under that piece of wood and tied together nicely the whole concept of tradition and up-to-dateness. Now coming home from that, somehow or another, we were talking about things, and we began to realize that what we were saying in this church week after week after week is that this is not a church that says you can, it's a church that says you can. That's so simple that you would think that nobody would even be startled by it, but I almost said, hey, no, that's an interesting thought. Listen to it. This is a church which does not say you can't. It does say you can. It says you can love, you can reach out, you can hope, you can overcome, you can show, you can fail, but you can grow. Mistakes are creative opportunities, not destructive events in life. And week after week after week after week after week, as we look at things around us, what we're trying to say is when the power of God in our lives transforms us, we can. And I mean prayerfully, by God, we can. And that's a strength. I hope as we gather in a moment around the communion table, you will remember that you can, and that the strength of your life is exactly that you have the power to overcome. But that's exactly what the concept of the biblical communion is. It's calling forth and remembering the power of God in life. When we say, this do in remembrance of me, we are calling forth the Hebrew word, zakar, which means remember. But the Hebrews were not like we are. They had all kinds of intellectual abilities and no heartfelt abilities. Whenever they talked about time, whenever they talked about a memory, they talked about an event that was real in their lives. And when we gather about the communion table to remember, we're not paying some sort of homage to an ancient event, but are making real in our lives today, at this moment, what that is signifying for us. And however, around the world it's being served today and all of the things that are being put onto it, the significance ultimately comes down to you individually. For me, it's the recall of power, the power of God in my life. For when one looks at Jesus, one sees one who suffered, one who faced many things, upheavals, trials, and tribulations, and who still, in the very end, could powerfully, under God, reach out with forgiveness and hope. So we gather. And in this church, like in so many others, we have two portions to it. The bread is passed by our deacons, and at the time the bread is passed, we ask that each of you taking the bread immediately take it, signifying that under God the power is individual to you, and the remembrance is individual to you. And then we pass the wine, and as we pass the wine together, we ask that you hold that and take it together, signifying not only the individuality under God, but our corporate structure. We have no rules and regulations about who may or may not take communion. That is left totally up to you. You are not under any obligation to take or not take, for you make the decision. There have been times in communion services where I have not taken of the communion, but merely joined in the meditation and the prayer. And we offer that as an option to you as well. But whatever we do, however we approach it, however this is signified in our own minds, however we bring it to reality in our existence today, that is the important thing. Today, we are signifying through this service that God is and is in our lives. Shall we pause for a moment of prayer? As we continue in a period of meditation and prayer, O God, to understand you in our lives, recognizing that causing a pause is not to remove the excitement of life, not trying to be overly holy, but to open ourselves totally, listening to you. For there's joy and happiness, there is humor and gladness, there is meditation and thoughtfulness. And as we gather, we ask that all of these things be a part of our understanding of your existence in our life now. As we continue in this moment of prayer and meditation individually, I'm going to ask